September 29, 1913. Somewhere between Belgium and England, the steamship Dresden was crossing the North Sea. Among its passengers was a 55-year-old German engineer traveling to London for a series of business meetings. That evening, he had dinner with two colleagues. Afterward, the three men walked along the ship's deck before separating for the night. He asked to be awakened early the following morning and returned to his cabin. But when morning came, he was gone. His bed had not been slept in. His luggage remained on board. A search of the ship found no sign of him. His coat and hat were discovered on deck near the railing. The ship eventually arrived in England without him. His disappearance immediately raised questions. Accident and suicide were obvious possibilities, but his invention had become important to industry and to governments preparing for war. And that night, he was traveling to Britain to discuss the future of his technology. Soon, a darker theory emerged: murder. Some blamed powerful oil interests. Others suspected governments. What really happened to Rudolf Diesel? Europe in the late 19th century was changing fast. Factories were growing, railways were expanding, mines were digging deeper, and ships were traveling greater distances. All of this required large amounts of power, and much of that power still came from one technology, the steam engine. The basic idea behind a steam engine was simple. Fuel, usually coal, was burned to heat water, which produced steam. The pressure created by that steam could then be used to move machinery. It was a technology that had helped drive the Industrial Revolution, but it had an important weakness. A large part of the energy produced by burning the fuel was lost as heat. For a factory owner, that meant spending more money on coal to produce the same amount of useful power. And as industries grew and machines became more common, that inefficiency became an expensive problem. Engineers were already trying to find a better solution. Internal combustion engines offered one possibility because, instead of using fuel to produce steam outside the engine, they burned the fuel directly inside a cylinder. These early engines were an improvement in some ways, but they still wasted a lot of energy. Rudolf Diesel believed he could do better. Diesel had become interested in one question: how could an engine turn more of the energy contained in fuel into useful work? He believed the answer could be found in compression. If air inside a cylinder was compressed hard enough, its temperature would rise until it became hot enough to ignite fuel without the need for an electrical spark. Turning that idea into a working engine took years. Diesel went through many experiments and failures before he and the engineers working with him produced, in 1897, an engine that showed what the technology could do. The business potential was clear. If an engine could produce the same amount of power while using less fuel, factories could lower their costs and ships could travel farther without having to refuel as often. Manufacturers began buying licenses to build engines based on Diesel's design, and as the technology spread to other countries, so did his name. The patents behind the engine also made him a wealthy man. But while Diesel's engine was finding its place in industry, the world around it was changing. Petroleum was becoming one of the world's most important businesses. Companies such as John D. Rockefeller's Standard Oil had built large operations around refining and distributing oil. At the same time, European governments were focused on a different issue: military power. Germany and Britain were engaged in a naval rivalry. Both countries were building larger fleets and investing in new ships and submarines. In that environment, fuel efficiency was no longer only about saving money. For a navy, an engine that used less fuel could allow a vessel to travel farther. Diesel engines were also useful for submarines, where they could provide power on the surface and help charge the batteries needed underwater. An invention that had begun as Diesel's attempt to make industrial power more efficient now had military value. By 1913, relations between Germany and Britain were tense. Less than a year later, the two countries would be at war. Yet, while the engine carrying Diesel's name was becoming more valuable, the man himself was facing a different reality. To the outside world, Rudolf Diesel still looked successful. His name was known around the world. Companies in several countries were building engines based on his work, and he had earned large sums of money from his patents. His private finances told another story. Investments had gone badly, expenses had grown, and much of the fortune he had made was disappearing. Then, before leaving for a business trip to England, Diesel did something unusual. He handed his wife, Martha, a bag and told her not to open it until the following week. He gave her no explanation. A few days later, Rudolf Diesel boarded a ship for England. September 29, 1913. Rudolf Diesel stepped aboard the Dresden in Antwerp, Belgium. The ship was heading across the North Sea toward Harwich, England. Diesel was 55 years old. Two men he knew, George Carols and Alfred Lookman, were traveling with him. Nothing seemed unusual. That evening, the three men had dinner together. After dinner, they went outside and walked along the deck. The North Sea surrounded them. It was the last evening of September, and England was only a few hours away. Eventually, the men decided to go to bed. Before leaving his companions, Diesel gave the crew an instruction. "Wake me at 6:15 tomorrow morning." Then he said goodnight and walked back toward his cabin. The next morning, 6:15 came. Diesel did not appear. Someone went to his cabin. He wasn't there. At first, there was little reason to panic. Perhaps he had already gone outside. But then they looked around the room. His luggage was still there. His personal belongings were still there. And his bed had not been slept in. There was something even stranger. Diesel's nightshirt had reportedly been laid out for him. His watch had been placed where he could see it from the bed. It looked as if Diesel had planned to come back to his cabin and sleep. The crew began searching the Dresden. They checked the ship. They looked around the deck. There was no sign of Diesel. Then they reached the stern. Near the railing, they reportedly found his hat and his overcoat. The coat had been neatly folded, but no one remembered seeing him there. No one saw him fall into the sea, and no one saw another person with him. There was simply a gap. At some point, after saying goodnight to his companions, Rudolf Diesel had walked away, and by morning he was gone. The Dresden continued toward England. Days passed. His family waited for news. Nothing came, no message, no confirmed sighting, no body. Then, about 10 days later, sailors aboard a Dutch ship noticed something floating in the water. They moved closer. It was the badly decomposed body of a man. And what the sailors did next would make Rudolf Diesel's death even harder to explain. The body was badly decomposed. The sailors could not identify the man by his face. So they searched his clothes. They found several personal objects and took them with them. But they left something far more important behind: the body itself. The sailors decided not to bring it aboard. They returned it to the sea. Days later, the objects recovered from the body reached Diesel's family. His son looked at them. They belonged to his father. There was now strong reason to believe that the body found in the North Sea was Rudolf Diesel. But by then it was too late. The body was gone. There would be no autopsy. No doctor could look for injuries. No one could check whether Diesel had been struck before entering the water. No medical examination could help determine exactly how he died. The simplest explanation required very little. Diesel returned to the deck sometime during the night. It was dark. The ship was crossing the North Sea. One wrong step near the railing could have been enough. He fell. No one saw it happen. By the time anyone noticed he was missing, the Dresden had continued on its way. It was possible. But now, look at what the crew had found. Diesel's bed had not been slept in. His nightshirt had been prepared. His watch was beside the bed. And on the deck were two more objects, his hat and his overcoat. The coat was reportedly neatly folded. If Diesel had simply stepped outside and accidentally fallen into the sea, why had he taken off his coat and hat? And why had he left them near the railing? There was no witness who could answer either question. An accident remained possible, but the evidence did not tell a simple story. After Diesel disappeared, Martha finally opened the bag her husband had left with her. Remember the instruction he had given her before leaving? Do not open it until next week. Now she did. Inside was cash and financial documents. Those papers revealed something the public could not see. Rudolf Diesel was in serious financial trouble. The famous inventor had earned large amounts of money from his patents, but much of it was gone. Investments had failed. Expenses had consumed more. The successful inventor known around the world was far less financially secure than he appeared. Before boarding the Dresden, Diesel had made sure his wife had money. He had also left her documents explaining his financial situation. Had Diesel simply been preparing for a trip, or had he been preparing Martha for something else? There was another strange detail, his diary. When the date of September 29th was examined, accounts of the case reported something unusual beside it. A cross. Diesel had apparently marked the very day he disappeared. No explanation was written beside it. But combined with the bag and his financial problems, the mark became difficult to ignore. Then consider the deck. His hat had been removed, his coat had been removed. The coat was reportedly folded. If Diesel intended to enter the water, those actions suddenly made more sense. But other details pointed in the opposite direction. Before going to his cabin, Diesel had asked the crew, "Wake me at 6:15 tomorrow morning." Inside his room, his nightshirt was ready. His watch had been positioned beside the bed. It looked like the room of a man expecting to sleep there. There was no suicide note, no clear farewell to his family, and no witness saw him go overboard. The evidence seemed to point in two directions at once. But there was a third possibility, and to understand why people considered it, you have to look beyond the Dresden. Look at where Diesel was going: Britain. In 1913, Britain and Germany were locked in an intense naval rivalry. Both countries were building warships. Both were investing in submarines, and Diesel's engine had become useful to naval technology. Less fuel meant greater range, and less than a year after Diesel boarded the Dresden, Britain and Germany would be at war. This gave rise to a darker story. What if someone in Germany did not want Diesel helping the British? Later, accounts connected his trip to discussions about diesel technology in Britain, with some versions tying it specifically to naval applications. A German inventor, a strategically important engine, a trip to Britain, and a naval arms race approaching war. Then, somewhere in the North Sea, the inventor disappeared. Another theory pointed towards some of the most powerful businesses in the world: the oil industry. Diesel had experimented with different fuels. Later stories claimed that an engine capable of using different fuels threatened companies whose fortunes depended on petroleum. That led to another question. Could powerful industrial interests have wanted Rudolf Diesel gone? But no assassin was ever identified. No order to kill Diesel has been found. No witness reported seeing an attack aboard the Dresden, and there is no evidence showing that someone used violence against him. But one question is harder to ignore. Why was Rudolf Diesel's body returned to the sea? Rudolf Diesel's death was never fully explained. His money problems made suicide possible. His work with engines also led to theories that he was killed, but none of these theories was ever proven. Diesel was gone. His invention was not. By 1913, companies in several countries were already building diesel engines. After his death, engineers kept improving them. Soon, diesel engines were being used around the world. They powered ships and submarines during both world wars. Later, they became common in trucks, trains, factories, and heavy machines. Millions of vehicles would use the idea Diesel had spent years trying to perfect, getting more power from less fuel. His invention became much bigger than the man who created it. Today, more than a century later, the name Diesel is known around the world. But Rudolf Diesel never saw what his invention became.